My flow. I gotta keep my flow going. I love that. Well, it's nice to see you all. You all know who I am. I'm Fran, and I wrote an outline and wrote notes about what I wanted to talk about, but I decided to leave it all behind and just sit and talk about what is comfortable for me and see what comes out. Right personality. So, my inspiration for this was that I see in human design parenting, there's a kind of a void, I'm wanting view. And I kind of see that there's this place that we talk a little bit about letting kids have their feelings or respecting their emotions or their emotional process. Like, Ra's always like, oh, just tell them to go off and be alone when, and I'm going to read a quote from him, but he says, just tell them to go off and be alone when they're having their feelings, because then, they can be creative and do what you do when you're on the low of your wave. Or if they're individuals, then they'll have melancholy, and it's also good to be alone. But I think that was sort of as close as Ra could get to supporting our kids' feelings, because he was from the time he was from. And I think it was probably really hard for him to conceive of a world where there could be parents who could actually support their kids' feelings and have awareness to really be able to be present when their kids, that stuff is going on. And this is information that is for all people. So, I would assume that all of you have an understanding of holding space for people's feelings, right? Like we hear that phrase a lot now, like, oh, I'm going to hold space for your feelings. And that's something we kind of come to, I think, in our adult life. But when you see people with really young children, and I've seen even with people who know human design, it's like the baby is crying, what do? You pick up the baby, you pat its back, you try to shush it, you just try to distract it from having its feelings. And so that there's just all of this conditioning from society about how, we shouldn't, I actually want to hear from you all, like what your experiences were as children also. It's worth taking a look. Like, how was it for you when you had feelings or emotions? How did your parents react? Anybody want to start?
I don't remember a lot when I was younger, but chances are there was no room for feelings. Even lately, I've been caretaking my 88-year-old father, and we had some discussions around some things, and he said, I couldn't handle your highs and lows. Mm-hmm. And
he was open emotionally?
He's
the emotional.
Yes. And so I have an open, right, and he was defined. And so that was interesting. And I get that, it was a shushing of it. But, and I don't know if it was that I didn't want to share my feelings, or I just didn't know how to share them, because I didn't know which was mine, which was theirs, and which was whoever's. Right. So I do.
They're okay. Yeah, some dog visitors.
Yeah. Now you can go.
Maybe a less at this time. We just had to check it out. Anything else you want to say about that?
No, just that I wish I could go back. I don't remember a whole lot from my younger years.
Right.
Whether that's okay.
Right. Stephanie, do you want to share anything?
Good question. I feel like it wasn't there's nothing too noticeable, like that my emotions were repressed, but like with the 1949, that's a really difficult emotional channel, like lots of explosions and stuff, and so I remember, I was really sensitive, and I had a hard time like with the world, and my mom was open solar plexus, but she's also like super hippy dippy and like feeling and touchy-feely and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I think like she was able to somehow, like, she's always talking about like wanting to hold space for people's feelings, and I think she did develop the ability to kind of do that. That said, like in adulthood, I feel like I totally amplify her. Like she won't just like freak out whenever I have.
When you have feelings.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
She's open?
So maybe I don't remember remember, how she was when I was a kid, but because I remember just being like super explosive and really challenged with it, but
maybe some things will come up.
yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
So I'm emotionally defined, and both of my parents are as well. And I don't have a lot of. I know that there was a whole lot of like stop crying, and then if there was a fit going on somewhere in public, my mom would just walk away, which actually is interesting considering Ra's advice, because it totally takes me out of like whatever I was doing, and now I'm like, oh, I gotta stay close to mom, And it felt really terrible as a kid, but it did modulate my social behavior around emotions. It was very much like keep it under control and deal with it later. And the story is that I would get very moody, and there was a parent talking about it yesterday, the 55 personality son, and it's just funny. We had the second line, completely not self-aware, but mom says I get moody, and she'd send me to grandma's house for a tune-up, is what she would call it. And grandma died. I looked at her chart, and she has every activation on the solar plexus, every single one. And I'm like, oh yeah, of course that felt really good and set me right. And, I was in a better mood, and she was able to really, I think there might be an element of like insulation or, having all of that emotional energy for her. And then also just completely warm and welcoming and come as you are and be as you are. And it's all good, So I would say on the spectrum, I had a lot of good people around. My parents knew how to like get me to the right people. Which is an interesting contrast for my daughter, who's open her solar plexus isn't open. And I came to human design when she was 6 months after all the colic, and realized that her fussy days were really my fussy days. And so much of me, so much of my deconditioning is really managing having the awareness of my emotions, which I hadn't, which my family had so perfectly, kind of showed me to the right person to get the needs or whatever in the space. But I also just had no idea that I was like that. So it's been an interesting how that works.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Imagine if everybody in the world was like your grandma. Not that everybody would have to be emotionally defined, but if everybody had an awareness and an understanding of how the interactions worked, and could just be okay with people having feelings. Like what would be different? Like how. So my thinking about it, based on some kinds of counseling modalities that I've done, is that when you have feelings and you don't have somebody to listen to them, or you actively shut down, they actually go to places that kind of clog up your awareness, right? So that's the whole sort of, when you're a grown up, something will happen and you get triggered, right? So there's a trauma element there too, right? So you get sort of stuffed up with all this stuff that's unshed, and then it can get set off. And so imagine if you had a mechanism or a framework to be able to not build all that stuff up, and to stay free of that, as relatively free of that as you can. I mean, the world, even if you have parents who couldn't listen to your feelings, even if you had parents that listened to your feelings 100% and were always there holding space for you, it's not acceptable in the world. Yeah.
Well, I'm just wondering, because I'm thinking about my mom, but the left versus right probably has something to do with it too. Is it a left more of they want to fix it? Is that a left thing, or am I not?
It could be, but I think it's a not self thing.
Okay.
I think it's a homogenized, this is how it is in our society, that people don't feel feelings, because the reason is that when other people around you feel feelings, if you're open, you're going to feel it too, but you also you might have an emotional reaction to it, even if you are defined, right? And it reminds you that you weren't listened to, and you got the message that you shouldn't have your feelings. And so why is that person getting to have their feelings? Like, that's not okay. And so...
Yeah, if I have to keep it under control, so do you.
Right. Hello. So... Let's see where we're at with that. So yeah, just sort of imagining what would the world be like. And I was just going to read this raw quote because it's really pertinent, and some of you might have heard it already, but would anybody else like to read it?
I am.
I'm sorry?
I don't.
You want to read it? Okay. And we're recording. I don't think you're on the video, but just to let you know we're recording. So.
Do you want to trade seats?
Oh, no.
Okay, it's here. I linked to the thread that didn't actually have the whole. I have to go somewhere else. Okay, open root. I don't have to rush. Give me just a second to
I'm
do this
good.
thing.
I'm never in a rush.
Yeah, never, don't worry.
Right.
If
So,
you haven't,
thank you. I know what it is.
I don't even know what time it is. Oh, time, hours. Oh, if that was over, it's over.
Here we go. I found it. Thank you all for your patience.
There's no patience needed, don't
Right.
there? So just so you know.
Yeah, if you were all homogenized, then it would be. You're right.
No.
Maybe.
Can I open these doors?
Yeah, they were talking out there. That's why I closed it.
Sorry,
I'm happy to do it.
Sally's by air.
It looks like they moved, so thank you. I was feeling the seconds too. And I was going to also say that I quoted Amy from a course that I did where she was like, and she talked about this a little bit in ours too. Amy Lee has said that having feelings or having, I'll just read it because I think I wrote it down. Basically that having feelings is just a way that our open centers are wringing themselves out. So I kind of like that.
Having feelings is just the way that
Your open centers wring themselves out because your openness, you're taking in all that stuff, and so that's kind of a place where the kids not getting to have their feelings. I'm going to talk about this in a second, but let's read the quote. Let me find it. Oh, crying is one of the ways the open centers just wring themselves out. Okay, so there, and then it's going to go down, and then whenever the quote ends.
So start at
Always.
Always keep in mind that in the nature of melancholy, that is also important to be able to protect your aura. Any individual who suffers from melancholy must be able to protect their aura when they go down, when they're sad. The most damaging thing to an individual when they are sad is to have somebody come up to them and say, "What is the matter?" You would think that that's really kind of sweet and nice, concerned, best intentioned, loving, friendly. All of that stuff is not true. You see, the moment you say to somebody who is melancholic, "What is the matter?" is the moment that they make up a reason. They're identified with it, and their melancholy instantly becomes depression. This is one of the most common things in the upbringing of the melancholic children or emotional children, that their parents become very uncomfortable with their emotional child being down or their melancholic child being sad. Not only is the parent uncomfortable with it, but depending on the design, they may be deeply affected by it. You want me to go?
Yes, please. Unless you want to pass it off. It's up to you.
Oh, I don't care.
Okay, yeah.
I'm reading the whole thing.
Yes.
Okay.
Until the quotes.
Oh. Okay. The melancholy, the sadness being lived out twice as strongly by the parent, or the emotional down being lived out by the parent, and then, of course, the parent is under pressure to eliminate that. And so they want to make the child happy in order not to be unhappy themselves, because they've fallen into the conditioning of their child. And then they get their child to make up reasons, and when the reasons aren't good enough, and when their reasons and answers aren't good enough, and they hire a therapist to make up the reasons, and the psychologist is to make up the reasons. It goes on and on and on, and there's nothing wrong with the child. By that time, there is no question about that. Welcome to the age of Prozac. The reality is that the moment you ask them is the moment you're telling them something very basic. You're saying to them you're sick, you've got a problem because you're unhappy, and we're going to fix it. This is so obvious that he is the boomer generation, because it feels like I'm not talking about kids now, we're talking about my generation. Okay, so like this is the craziest thing I've ever. Okay, you're saying to them you're sick, you've got a problem because you're unhappy, and we're going to fix it, whether you like it or not, because there's something wrong with you. All individuals know the hypocrisy of a happy life. There is no such thing. There is life, whether it's happy or not, good or not, right or not. It really is not the point. That's all Maya. It's just life. So protect your children who are
emotional and protect your children who are individual and protect them by not being so damn sensitive to their discomfort. Let them live out their discomfort and encourage them to see that you recognize there is something wrong with that. Oh, you're sad today? Yeah, so what? Why don't you go do something creative? It'll be good for you. Don't turn that into, oh, you're sad today, let me make you happy. Awareness does wonders for the upbringing of children. It does wonders. Not only that, it takes all the guilt trip out of the parent. You don't have to feel bad that your baby doesn't smile all the time. It's okay. Probably. I would love to add that because I have undefined emotional children and I'm emotional with my husband.
Yeah.
Whatever you ask.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send it out. Thank you, Jen. We weren't officially introduced, but I'm Fran.
I'm Jen.
Nice to meet you. So what comes up for me when I hear that is what we were talking about a little bit before, that sort of this automatic response or automatic reaction to when kids have their feelings is to interfere with them. Is to get in there, shake them around, try to distract them. It's automatic maybe in a homogenized way. You know, I mean, yes, that was the world that Ra was living in. And even I would say we can take it one step farther beyond sort of, okay, oh, you're sad, go be alone and do something creative. Like, oh, you're sad. And like, here I am to support you with that. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have to interfere. I don't have to tell them what to do. We don't have to guide it. We just have to allow the process. And then they'll take on less of that clutter, less of that like emotional sort of clogging up that we were talking about. So I think it's really useful here to kind of have a little bit of an understanding about emotions versus feelings and how, you know, in human design it's sort of like, well, yes, you can have feelings if you're open emotionally, you know, but you have the mechanical wave if you're emotionally defined. If you're individual, you have melancholy. But I think, like the quote from Amy, like not self-themes and conditioning and feelings can come up with taking in conditioning in all the open centers too, right? So we have, you know, if a kid is having feelings, maybe it's about they have an open heart and they are sad about not feeling worthy, you know, and they just need to have feelings about that. Or so you can like keynote any open center, open head, like, oh my gosh, their brains, like they're just so like overstimulated and like it's like too much to think about, or like certainty, like I'm feeling so nervous because I'm uncertain, and then feelings come up, or open throat, like frustration and not being heard, that feelings can come up. I like going through them all because it's fun, but open G, you know, what's the homogenized thing to do with kids in this society? What are you going to be when you grow up? You know, and like what comes up for a kid with an open G when you ask them that question? Like, that's going to feel really shitty, you know, and they're probably going to have some feelings about that. Open sacral, they're probably just exhausted, right? And, you know, they can cry about how tired they are. Open solar plexus, obviously, all the stuff that they've taken in. Open spleen, they just don't feel well, or they have to let go of something they don't want to and they're really sad about it, or open root, like just having to release the pressure and the tension. So I think feelings come up for our kids no matter what their design is. And so that's where we can kind of step in and offer this framework and be able to, you know, not just sort of be like, yeah, you get to have your feelings and that's cool, but actually offer them presence. Offer them awareness. So if you're all willing to, we can do a little exercise, just a little listening exercise, and it requires pairing up. So if it feels correct for you, would you like to, or I invite you to pair up with somebody, and we're just going to do what it is, I'll tell you what it is before you decide, is you're just going to share time. So one person will talk for 2 minutes, the other person will listen delightedly, give them eye contact or whatever's comfortable. You don't have to look in their eyes, whatever, but give them your attention in a delighted way. Like you're seeing this person and their beauty and their, you know, magnificence, and you're just taking in what is coming out for them. And you're not speaking back, you're not offering advice, you're just holding that space. And then after 2 minutes, we switch. So if anybody doesn't want to do it, like I can pair up or whatever too. So anybody have any? No, do it. So, do you? Okay, I'll let it just play out. want to do? Sure. Does that work? Yeah. I can pause the video because often what we do, because we want it to be safe, is that what you share in these 2 minutes is confidential.
Okay.
Unless you say, like, you can
Do we have
talk
a
about
prompt
this.
of this? No.
Whatever comes up. So, yep, but I'll pause it.
Can I get your level?
Thank you all for engaging with that. Awesome. Okay, so would anybody like to share how that was for you as a listener? Or what came up?
Listening is much easier than speaking for me, anyways. Yeah, I'm good at attentive listening, but not so much speaking.
Yeah, yeah. And what about as a speaker? The one doing the talking?
I like engagement. I don't like to be, just being the one that talks. If she could engage, then would be much more comfortable. Yeah, for me.
I like that I had a timer.
Oh, yeah.
Because I can just go and go and go and go. And she always like, I just want you to go. I was like, but I will, but I don't like it. Like, please stop me, because I'll just speak the song of me. Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
I don't like doing it.
Being a speaker? Is that true?
Oh, well, I liked it both ways. But being the speaker, it was hard to not stop and try to re-engage because I noticed, not a reaction.
Oh, I'm very reactive.
No judgment.
Like,
I think that's just,
like
but that's also how I do conversation, right? I'm like, oh, I see you shifted a little.
Yes.
Okay. I was like, okay.
Thank you for being honest.
I didn't hear what you said.
I said, are we interrupting?
Oh, yeah, this is the parenting.
And she said
Empathy
yes.
talk.
This is empathy talk.
Right. Well, jump in. So, I mean, I think with having that, so what we just did was we did a listening exercise where we shared time, 2 minutes, each person spoke and the other person listened and didn't add. And so that's an experience that not a lot of people really get to have. Usually the sort of homogenized way of communicating is, just this back and forth. But when our kids are having feelings, they don't want to have a conversation with us. They don't want us to offer, well, why don't you just go be alone in your room and do something creative? Like, they're in their feelings, they're like just in it. And so instead of, trying to jump in and make it be sort of have this discourse or this back and forth, we can put a framework around it and allow our kids to just get everything out that they need to. This is also a really helpful practice for grown-ups. So, I don't know if any of you had any sort of feelings or notice, but a lot of times what happens when someone is just listening to you and really putting their attention on you and letting you just say what you need to say, feelings come up. Things can come out. And that happens naturally for our kids. Like, if we give them our full attention, then stuff can come up. So there is an organization called Hand in Hand Parenting that does some of this like listening practice stuff with kids. And they have something called special time. That is, you're offering your child, and you get to put a frame around it so it has a timer. So you're not like having to exert boundless amounts of energy and attention, but you can say, I can give you 15 minutes, I can give you 20 minutes, we'll do whatever you want to do, aside from whatever, like, obviously overt things, but, it's interesting to really stretch those limits sometimes and see, because they'll do something, they'll want to play with you, or depending on age, but eventually, with certain kids, like, those feelings start to come up because you're shining that light on them. And when somebody looks at you when you're talking and sees your goodness and your like magnificence, right? Like, every time, Brandon, you were saying, you look at a design and it's like, it's so magnificent, you can look at somebody and see that, then you feel safe. You feel like, I can go to this place to have these feelings where it's not safe to do that in the world. And then you can get all that stuff out and not be clogged up. And so our kids over time aren't going to be collecting and building up all that stuff that turns into conditioning. So, yeah.
And my son just turned 18, and we just did that the other day. We've done it a little bit over time, and he doesn't talk. Fine, there's no talking with him. But he was having such a hard time, and literally, I have to get in his face. And then we started this screaming match, and there comes the tears finally. And then usually when we was little, when we did that, literally, I would have to poke him. Yeah. And I would poke him, and he'd be
because he's not emotional.
And then he would melt into my arms, and we would fall into bed, and he would just cry, and I'd be like, "Are you done?" And he'd be, oh. And even at 18 the other day, I just did the same thing. I was like, "Dude, whatever's going on, you got to figure it out because this is not cool." And we had to have that screaming, yelling match. And, I don't want to be a bad parent by having this screaming match, but it worked.
Yeah.
It's like the only way to penetrate through whatever the heck, I don't know if it's a reflector thing or whatever, but it was always, we always end up, are you done?
What a great mom.
Well, I don't know about a great mom. Because you know why I don't want to be a great mom? Because if he turns out shitty, I have to take that responsibility. I take the positive, I gotta take the negative, and I don't want to take either.
Well, your kids are going to be who they are, kind of no matter what you do. So if all you do is be the best mom you can, right? And there's stuff that's going on that they're in the world, you're not in control of, right? But that really brings up for me what you're saying is that our kids are going to have those feelings no matter what we do, right? So. Those days, like, my kids are older now, this still happens where it's just like, nothing's right, like every little thing, and it's like, oh my God, I don't want that thing to eat, and then you're like, well, maybe you want this thing to eat. Hey, join me. And they're like, no, that's not the right thing, and it's just like you're trying to appease, and it's obvious, it becomes very quickly obvious that it's not about the thing that they're starting to have the feelings about. It's just about, like, they have this this conditioning, this getting clogged up with stuff that they've taken into their open centers or their melancholy or their emotional process or their open emotional process that just needs to come out. And so when you can, just make a decision that you can just be there with awareness, it's so powerful. And this is the example that I use. It's like, how can I sit here? I was trying to get ready for this talk before I did it in Austin. And I was pretty focused. I was in my room on my computer, and my younger daughter, who's emotional and I'm open, comes in, and she's like, I don't even know what it was about, and, that something was bothering her. And I was just, like, I didn't feel myself right away because I was focused. And she didn't ask for my consent to, like, come in and have feelings. I mean, they're kids, right? Like, we need to give them a lot of leeway. And, I talked to her about, like, getting my attention, and then I can give her my full attention. But if she's got stuff that's up, I'm not necessarily she's not going to be able to do that. When you get all in those feelings, I mean, all you emotional people know, and non-emotional people know, like, you're not going to be able to, like, be logical. And so I felt myself starting to amplify, and I was getting annoyed, and she was just, like, over there having a 39:55 moment of, like, oh, this thing is bothering me. And I was like, and I felt this, and then suddenly I was like, wait, okay. And I was able to, like, turn toward her and be like, she needs a session. That's what we call it in this framework. She needs a session. I need to just give her my full attention. She needs to cry for as long as it needs to take. And when she was a baby, she was like a couple weeks old, she started taking a session every single night. For about 30 minutes, 8 p.m. would come, she'd start getting like, nothing's right. And I'd be like, and you're trying to do this with your baby, like, what's wrong? Is it your diaper? Are you hungry? It's like, no, you don't even need to know what's wrong. You just give them that attention. And I would just hold her and sit for 30 minutes, and she would just, the baby scream of, like, gummy scream with the cheeks going up and the tongue, and it was so beautiful. But I had to have awareness to know that's what was going on, or I would just be amplifying. So I think that's why this framework is really useful, because you're really putting a box around it. You can say, okay, I have to shift into this mode, and be able to really hold that space consciously. And then sometimes, you know, if you have older kids and they haven't had access to this process, it could last a really long time and it feels like it'll never end. And sometimes with younger kids, it just depends. You know, I mean, there's so many different, and we'll talk about this in the panel this afternoon. There's so many different combinations of openness and definition that it's sort of impossible to anticipate, but you just navigate it with each individual as you go. And, you know, you just kind of give them that, and I lost my train of thought. But anyway, so thank you all for listening to me sort of pour all of that out. I'm wondering if anybody has any like questions or thoughts that you want to bring up. I know this was recorded, so even if I don't give it to Jonah for the YouTube, I'm happy to share it with you if you want.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
I love that reminder, like just like letting it exist. So I'm emotionally defined, and my older daughter is emotionally undefined. Me and Dad are emotionally defined, so she's just like the amplifier of everything. So just
because she's not emotional doesn't mean she's not going to have her feelings.
Yeah.
And what a beautiful thing to get to just let them, like, now when babies cry, I'm just like, thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Right.
You know, because this is what I was going to say earlier. I know it's a real contradiction to the way we were raised, right? Like, you shouldn't be having those feelings. And so when somebody's delighted that you're having your feelings, like, you can actually have them. And, you know, my theory is you can't differentiate if you're not safe. No, thank you.
I felt it.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't feel like people around you are going to be able to respect whatever's going on, you can't really get to it.
absolutely.
So that's what I feel like, holding that space, putting that frame around it is what gives our kids that safety to be able to. Now, not all kids are going to want to, it's going to be different. So like some kids, like my older daughter's not emotional and I'm not emotional. So it's just the two of us, like something really big has to be coming up. Like she didn't have a lot of sessions. I was going to say about your example with your son is that on Hand in Hand parenting, that site I was talking about, they have a thing called stay listening, which actually is a little bit about, like, you see the need, like they're trying to get to it and they just don't quite have the tools yet. They don't quite have the self-awareness, but you know that if that can come out, that they'll be more free. And so there are these tools that you can use to kind of guide them into that experience, which it sounds like exactly what you did.
He would get mad at me though. Mom, there's nothing there. I don't know if that was true or not. I have no clue. I felt it, but no.
I mean, I never.
There's something
I
wrong.
had the same thing with I had 4 children, grown children, but 3 were non-emotional and 1 was emotional. And my rules were like anything goes pretty much as long as it's a safe. And I used to have my kids write. I'd say, go up to your room. And I swear that it worked, you know, go deal with your feelings. But I want to hear about them, but, you know, maybe you'll be clear if you put it on paper. So we did a lot of that kind of, but yeah, no, they're so different. And my oldest son, he never could say anything that was going on. And I remember when he was like 12, maybe, it just occurred to me, you've been through a lot of loss in your life. You know, you lost your father, and I just kind of brought it up, and I watched his face, and he just like, he could see him take it in, and then just his whole body language, he just dropped into a pose. He still couldn't talk, but it was clear that it had hit home for him, you know. And it is so different with the emotional and non-emotional, you know.
But yet everybody, emotional or non, sets up these barriers to having feelings because it's not safe to do it. So
I was a hider. I
Yeah.
went and felt by myself, or safe in a closet or under the bushes or something.
I wonder what would have been different if you had somebody who was safe to be able to do
I
that.
would probably not be this woman you're looking at. You know, a different person. Are you kidding? No, I worked it out, but I'm so grateful for myself. That's what it comes back to. You know, it's like.
Well, and I have found that, I mean, I certainly can discharge or release stuff now, like when I don't have a listening partner. Like, that's possible. But I think this is something else that I wanted to talk about. I think there's a chemistry when we're talking about our interactions. If someone's an open, you know, has an open emotional system and they have a listening partnership with someone who defines their solar plexus, suddenly maybe they'll have access to stuff that they couldn't, like it was still in there, the conditioning or the stuff they've taken in, but they haven't been able to quite get to it. So there's going to be like those interactions with the aura that I think that's actually that's why it's like, go be alone and have your feelings. Like, yeah, maybe like have your feelings and then do your creative thing. It's like, if I'm like, we're talking about 3-year-olds here, like, they're not going to want to go like draw something or like sing a song. You know what I mean? Like, so, yeah.
Can I add?
Yes.
Like, trying to hold it all here,
yes.
I'm gonna burst. Okay.
Thank you.
So, I want to add a lot to the point of, our conditioning, because I really am getting to it's really unfolding a lot in me, and it's really teaching me something completely different than I've done at all, and it's just amazing what I've seen. I have a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 15-year-old. So, I see where there's a situation where there's a huge group of little girls that are generators, and they're all like, they call it camp chickens at my house 24/7, I feel like. And now there's kind of this little drama thing going on, and I'm taking my perspective from my life and how that worked out in mine, and then seeing it with my daughter, who's a totally different person. She's a manifestor, I'm a projector, so every type sees into the world in a totally different way, and then trying to talk anything out with a child in any way, even if I can consciously see that there's that I can't, because the way she's experiencing this thing is that she's being told what to do or being told no. It's not about a feeling that this makes her feel bad. It makes her feel pissed. Yes, she's a manifestor and was born angry because that's just how they are. And so it's not self. It is purely themselves. I don't know why it's not self, because they're born like, I'm consecutive. I want your boob. I don't want that bottle. I don't want you. I don't want this. I'm gonna drink off your boob. I'm mad. So that's it. So that was what that is, So now, and like, they come to me with whatever's happening. We just sit there and then they lead me through what they need. And I don't offer anything, and I don't need a timer with children. See, because children don't need to hear anything from me because they know better than me. There's never going to be there will be, but if the child, knows what they're doing, and you need trying to explain anything. I don't explain anything to them. Yep. I let them explain their experience, because my explanation is going to be conditioned regardless how long I've deconditioned. So for me, that works a lot, and they teach me what it means to be their type. And I don't feel like everybody's here to talk it out just because we're taught. If you can't say it, there must be something wrong with you. But see, the thing is that sometimes people just aren't that way. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they need to talk it out, and they may seem to you because you think that that's how you feel, and that's an expression. It's expressing in a way that is telling your feelings, and I don't think that at all. My projector, he'll come in, he'll sit by me, and sometimes he'll just be near me. It's a triple split, and he just wants to be near me. So, and then sometimes he'll come and he'll talk, and then I just listen, and the things he's saying are being expressed through, something that needs to be expressed, but not in a way that I'm saying, these are my feelings, and this is why this is happening to me, and how I feel. He's talking about how everything occurred in his day, and I can tell that that's what he needed to do, and that doesn't mean that that's incorrect. So, I honor my space, I honor your space, and that works best for me. So, if I look, because anytime I feel like I'm looking outward and I'm starting to feel, so like with my reflector, leading up to this, I'm getting anxiety. I've never left home. I've never left my kids, and so he's so much like me. We have a lot. He has the same motivation, tone, and color, and determination, tone, and color. So. He's starting to do this thing where he wants his clothes on, but then he takes them off. Everything, he feels it all over his body. And I started feeling that way. And he was crying and crying and crying. And finally, I felt so helpless. And I started to cry, and it stopped. Like this. So he was telling me to let it out. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so he guided me, right? Because he doesn't talk. So
thank you so much.
Did you say he's a reflector?
My youngest, I have a almost 3-year-old reflector, a 4-year-old manifestor, and a 15-year-old projector.
That's my 18-year-old's a reflector.
I know. I think you've talked to me, so because I'm listening to you, and I like the yelling thing. I was like, I think you said this to me somewhere in some place, but I don't know. Things are, and people are coming up to me all over the place. That you're like, you're Jen, and you said this thing one time, and so it's hard for me. But I felt like something somewhere. But
yeah, I mean, I appreciate you shining the light on sort of like, I mean, obviously the exercise we did was just a really quick sort of introduction, like, and the tools we have when we don't really know each other or feel safe are basically
I would say that's
talking.
a great exercise.
Okay,
Great
yeah.
exercise, yeah.
But with kids, you know, it's not going to usually look like.
But some people do.
But some
need
kids
the timer.
do.
I don't
Right.
need a timer for children. Some people.
Oh,
you know,
for me, the timer part was the special time where you're just like, I can give you this attention to do what you want for fun for this much time. And then if feelings come up and they start having a big session, then
wait, what?
the timer is like for my energy. Like if I'm not able to like be able to be present, like I know I don't have an hour's worth of time to listen to a session. Or I don't have an hour's worth of
to listen
attention.
to your kid. Okay.
Because stuff can come up with the special time. So the special time is a little different because that sort of starts with play and then can go to a deeper place if stuff comes up for them. But if they're having a session, like it's not like when the example I gave when my daughter came in and I was working and when I turned my attention to her, I was like, well, this is going to take as long as it takes, you know, and it's going to be expressed however it's expressed. So I love that piece of what you're saying is like, yeah, I mean, some kids might need to just talk and a lot, and some kids are going to need to cry, and some kids are just going to maybe need to snuggle or scream, or it can look like a lot of
Or like
things.
my daughter, I don't know if you saw that video, but I really like that with the manifestor.
I did.
Because I've talked to Simon about this, a manifestor, and he's, you know, the questioning is I can always sense with a manifestor the question, they don't quite know what to do with it, and that is something that they're born with because they don't know what to do with it. And so she's crying. She's crying because she couldn't get what she wanted out of her friends or something. And so I said, "Did you want a hug?" Because she's touched, you know. And she's like, "No." And I was like, "I'm gonna give you a hug." She's like, "Yes, I'm gonna hug you." So sweet. But that's always with her, you know. So because I'm bouncing around, you know, I got reflectors, I got projectors, I got generators. I mean, my entire day is children, right? Yeah. So it's hard to get. Okay, wait, you know, your brain, and with her, you know, it's like I do have to, you know, inform her that I'm available for a hug, you know, because she can't pick up on any of that.
Well, and that just goes to the most important thing is awareness. Is like being aware of your child's type and sort of how that you're going to best interact with them, even, you know, knowing how they're going to be able to get what they need or get to their feelings or
right.
So, you know, for me, it's really helpful to have that just sort of like, okay, I want to shift my gear and really change my expectation of this interaction.
I try really hard though sometimes to like not do that. Like I don't like this. I feel like anytime I'm trying to think this, it's like I try so hard not to. I know, you know, to just try to help train myself, you know, like to just in awareness, like not to think, oh wait, you're a manifestor. That it's like, okay, that's you.
Right.
You know?
For me, it's like just getting out of my head. Like if I shift my gear where I'm like, this is happening, and then I'm like, wait, okay, just gonna be here, right? And then the right things will come up. Hopefully, the things that they need, because you'll actually be able to be responsive to them because you're actually seeing them and receiving and having that exchange. So thank you.
A person and not a piece of paper.
Yeah, exactly. So, if anybody else would like to add anything,
I just want to say thank you for the slight comment the comment that you said about asking your daughter, "Do you want a hug?" And her going, "No," and then you saying, "I'm gonna give you a hug," and her going, "No." Like in the same moment, because that's reality.
as a manifestor,
If
you had had that as a child,
that feel acknowledged through you acknowledging your daughter.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Just imagine what would have it been like for all of our parents to have been able to do
My
this.
little scared girl. It's like,
So that's pretty much what I had to say. So if anybody else wants to chat about it or has anything else to add, thank you all so much for sitting and bringing what you brought. And like I said, I went totally off book with this. Just was like letting stuff come up, and I loved it so much. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
I'd like to give you a hug.
Yes, everybody likes something over here.